Millbrook, Wyoming, November 1882. The coat was the thing that started it. Nora Bright had seen Edward Colton in that coat every morning for 3 weeks, crossing from his barn to the main house in the gray Wyoming pre-dawn, collar turned up against the November wind, the wool so worn at the left elbow that the lining showed through in a patch the size of a man's fist. She noticed it the way you notice a loose shutter banging in the night. Once you hear it, you can't stop. She was 25 years old and had come to Millbrook in September to settle her father's estate. Her father, James Bright, had owned 40 acres on the south end of the valley. Modest land, a sound cabin, a small but healthy vegetable garden that had gone to frost now, and a debt at the feed store that she had paid off in the first 2 weeks by selling 3 of the 4 horses. She had kept the gray mare, Clover, because Clover was sensible, and because Nora had decided that 2 sensible creatures on 40 acres was enough to start with. She had not planned to stay past October. She had a life in Laramie, a position doing accounts for a printer, a rented room with a window that faced east, a small routine that fit her like a worn shoe, not comfortable exactly, but familiar. She had told herself she would come, settle the estate, and return by the time the first hard frost came. The first hard frost came, and she was still there, and she found she had not decided to stay so much as failed to decide to leave, which she understood was a different thing, though from the outside they looked the same. Her nearest neighbor was Edward Colton, whose property began at the Cottonwood line, 200 yards north of her fence. The Colton Ranch was something to look at. 300 acres of good valley bottom, a 2-story house that had been built to last, a barn that was tight and straight, cattle that were fat and well kept. Everything about the property said a man who had taken care of things for a long time. The man himself said something slightly different. He was 63 years old. She learned this from Pearl Dawes at the general store, who had lived in Millbrook since before it was called Millbrook, and who considered the distribution of local information a civic duty. He had run the Colton operation since he was 22, had married Clara Worthing in 1858, had lost her to a fever 8 years ago. His 2 daughters were grown and gone, one to Denver, one to a ranch outside Cheyenne. He had a foreman named Hicks who managed the day work, and 4 hands who did what Hicks told them. He went to church on Sundays. He did not go to socials. He had, Pearl said with the specific concern of a woman who felt responsible for the general welfare of the entire county, become very solitary. Nora had filed this away and introduced herself to him across the fence in October, which had produced a 2-minute conversation about whether the creek that ran between their properties was prone to flooding in spring. He had answered her questions directly and thoroughly, and then he had gone back to what he was doing, which was checking a fence post with the focused attention of a man who prefers the company of fence posts to most alternatives. She had watched him walk away and thought, that is a man carrying something heavy and carrying it alone. The coat, though. The coat was the thing she couldn't get past. Not because she was sentimental about coats, but because she was practical, and the practicalities were clear. November in Wyoming was not the month to have your elbow lining showing. She had her father's wool to spare, his winter things, folded in the chest, more than she needed, the kind of good thick wool that held heat the way a stone holds the sun. She had her knitting needles. She had her evenings. She spent 3 of them on the scarf. Dark gray, her mother's double-thick pattern, the kind that wrapped twice around the neck and still had length to spare. She had done the fringe edges the way her mother always had, not decorative, just enough to keep the weave from unraveling in a hard winter. When it was done, she held it up in the lamplight and thought it was exactly what it was, a warm and honest scarf, practical as a fence post, and likely to be refused. She took it to him on a Thursday. He was splitting wood behind the barn. She heard the axe before she saw him, the clean crack of it, steady and rhythmic, the sound of someone who has done a thing so many times that the body does it without consulting the mind. He didn't hear her coming over the sound of the work, and for a moment she stood at the corner of the barn and watched. He wore the coat. He swung the axe with the economical force of a lean man who knows exactly how much effort the task requires and applies no more. His gray-blue eyes were on the wood. His face, weathered to the texture of good leather, was utterly concentrated. Then he set the axe in the stump and reached for the next piece, and saw her standing there and straightened. "Miss Bright," he said. "Mr. Colton." She held out the scarf. "I had spare wool. I thought you could use it." He looked at the scarf, then at her, then at the scarf again, with the expression of a man encountering something he doesn't quite have a category for. "You made that," he said. "I did." He didn't reach for it immediately. "I have a coat," he said. "I know. The elbow's going." He looked down at the coat with the mild surprise of a man who hadn't noticed, or had noticed and decided it wasn't his business to address. He reached out and took the scarf, held it with both hands for a moment, the weight of it, the thickness. "That's good wool," he said. "My father's. He'd have wanted it used." A pause. He wrapped it once around his neck with a kind of careful deliberateness, like a man accepting something he isn't sure he deserves. The gray of it suited him. She noticed this and said nothing about it. "Thank you," he said. It came out plainly, without performance, which she found was the only way he said anything. "Don't mention it," she said, and walked back across the frost-hard ground toward her own property. She was 20 yards away when she heard him pick up the axe again. The rhythm was the same. She kept walking. The town, predictably, had something to say. It took 8 days. Pearl Dawes was first, not unkindly, but with the directness of a woman who considers the softening of a message a form of dishonesty. "Ed Colton hasn't accepted a thing from a neighbor in 4 years, Pearl said, one morning while Nora was buying lamp oil. "Margaret Holt tried to bring him a pie last winter. He left it on the porch untouched for 2 days, and then returned the dish." Nora looked at her. "He accepted the scarf." "I know." Pearl set down the oil can. "That's why I'm telling you." Nora waited. Pearl had more. Pearl always had more. "He's 63 years old," Pearl said. "You're 25, and this is a small town." "I know how old he is," Nora said. "I gave him a scarf, Pearl. It was cold." Pearl studied her for a long moment with the assessing gaze of a woman who has been reading people for 60 years and is rarely wrong. "All right," she said, and handed over the lamp oil. But as Nora turned to go, Pearl added quietly, "He was a good man before Clara died. He's still a good man. He just forgot." Nora walked home thinking about that. He just forgot. She also thought about what a man does with himself when he forgets, how it shows in a coat. She went back the following Tuesday, not with anything knitted this time, but with a pot of bean soup, because the temperature had dropped overnight to something serious, and because she had made too much for one person, which was true. He was in the barn when she arrived, checking a horse's foreleg with the absorbed attention he gave everything. He looked up when her shadow crossed the doorway. "Miss Bright?" "Soup," she said. "I made too much." He looked at the pot, back at her. He didn't say, "You didn't have to," which she appreciated. It was the kind of thing people said when they meant the opposite, and she had the sense he didn't say things he didn't mean. "Leave it on the table," he said. "I'll be in directly." She left it on the table, and he came in, and she found 2 bowls on the second shelf without being asked, and they sat at his kitchen table in the cold, gray November light and ate soup, and he asked her about her father's property, the south fence, the creek access, whether the cabin roof had held through last winter's snow. He asked with the particular attention of a man who is genuinely interested in the answer, not filling silence, actually listening. She told him about the south fence, which had a post down she couldn't fix alone. He said he'd look at it. She started to say he didn't have to, and stopped herself, because she'd just appreciated him not saying that, so she said, "Thank you," instead, which seemed to satisfy both of them. He wore the scarf. She noticed it hanging on the peg by the back door when she came in. Worn and not yet put away, which meant he'd had it on recently. She said nothing about it. I want to stop for just a moment, because you, wherever you are in the world tonight, found this story, from the American West to the American South, from Canada to Scotland, from Australia to South Africa. People are listening to these voices from 140 years ago and recognizing something true in them. Where are you tonight? Drop your country in the comments. I read every single one. Now let's get back to Nora and Ed, because something is about to happen that neither of them expected. He fixed the south fence post on a Wednesday, arriving at her property early in the morning, with tools and 2 boards of good timber, and had it done before she had finished her breakfast. She came out to find him tamping the earth around the new post with a methodical heel tap that had the satisfaction of long practice. "You brought your own lumber," she said. Post was beyond patching. He didn't look up. "New one'll hold through spring at least." She looked at the post, then at him. "I'd like to pay you for the wood." It was scrap. He picked up his tools. Left over from the barn extension. Would have sat and warped. She understood he wasn't going to let her pay him, and she understood this was not about money but about something else, some interior calculation she hadn't been given access to. She let it go the way she was learning to let certain things go with him. "Stay for coffee," she said. He stayed. It became a thing, not announced, not agreed upon, just a thing that happened with the quiet logic of river water finding its level. Tuesdays, she brought something. Soup, bread, once a jar of the last summer preserves she'd found in her father's cellar. Cherry, still good. Thursdays, he appeared on some legitimate errand. The fence, the sticking window latch on her north side, the chimney cap that had worked loose. He always had a reason. She had stopped examining the reasons. What she noticed instead was this. He was different in motion than he was in stillness. In stillness, he had the quality of something closed. In motion, working a fence, carrying wood, showing her how to properly bank the stove coals against a cold night, he opened, slightly, the way a window opens in a cold room, just enough to let the air change. He was also, she discovered, occasionally funny. Not in any broad way. In the way that comes from 40 years of observing the specific absurdities of ranch life. He told her once about a cattle drive in '67 where the entire herd had decided, as one organism, to stand absolutely still for 6 hours in a creek bed, for reasons no one ever determined. He described it with the deadpan delivery of a man reporting a weather event, and she laughed before she'd fully processed that he'd made a joke, and he looked mildly pleased in a way he clearly had no intention of showing. She found herself thinking about these moments in the evenings, the crack in the deadpan, the almost smile, the way he handed her a coffee cup with the same careful deliberateness he brought to fence posts and harness buckles. She was knitting again, a pair of gloves this time, not for any declared reason, when a knock came on her door on a Friday evening in December that she had not been expecting. His name was Robert Ainsley, 28 years old, dark-haired, the second son of the Ainsley cattle family from the north end of the valley, recently returned from 2 years in Denver. He had come, he said pleasantly, because he'd heard she was settling in and he wanted to welcome her properly to the county. He was handsome. She recognized this with the neutral accuracy of someone noting the weather. He was also certain of his welcome in a way that she found herself measuring, without quite meaning to, against Ed Colton's complete absence of that quality. She gave him coffee. He told her about Denver and the Ainsley operation and the county social coming up in January, which she should absolutely attend, and which he would be glad to escort her to. He had a great deal to say. He said it well. When he left, she stood at the window and watched him ride out toward the north road and thought, with a precision that surprised her a little, he doesn't actually ask questions. She picked up her knitting. Tuesday. She told Ed about the visit while he had coffee at her table. Not to provoke anything, simply because she told him things now, and he told her things, and it had become the texture of these mornings. He listened, said nothing for a moment. "Ainsley family's good land," he said. "Yes." Robert's the younger one. Spent time in Denver. A pause. He turned his cup. He'll come back. Probably, she said. He looked at his coffee. She looked at her hands. Outside, the December wind pushed at the cabin windows with the persistence of something that expects to eventually be let in. You should go to the social, he said. If you want to, meet people. I've met people, she said. He looked up at her. She was looking at the window, and then she looked at him, and there was a moment that was not quite a moment yet, the kind that hovers just at the edge of becoming something, and then retreats. More soup? She said. Please, he said. She got up and ladled it, and neither of them said anything more about Robert Ainsley, and Ed stayed an extra 20 minutes past his usual, which she noted, and filed away without examining it too closely. 3 days before Christmas, Hicks the foreman came to her door looking uncomfortable, which on Hicks's face, a face built for stoicism, was remarkable. He'd like it if she came to the main house, Hicks said. Mr. Colton had taken a fall from the barn loft. Nothing broken, Doc Mercer had confirmed that much, but the doc had told him to stay off his feet for 3 days, and Ed Colton had lasted 1 day before attempting to get to the barn, which had resulted in a second conversation with Doc Mercer that had been, by Hicks's report, emphatic. She found Ed Colton in the sitting room armchair looking like a man imprisoned against his will. His right ankle was wrapped. His expression was the expression of a man who has been told to sit still and finds sitting still a form of violence. Before you say anything, he said when she walked in. I'm fine. I wasn't going to say anything, she said. What do you need? He looked at her. The hands are managing the cattle, she said. Hicks seems competent. Your barn won't fall down in 3 days. What do you need that isn't getting done? A pause. He was not accustomed, she had come to understand, to being asked what he needed. He was accustomed to assessing what was needed and providing it. The reversal disoriented him. The correspondence, he said finally. I have letters from the Denver stock agent that want answering, and I write slowly. I write quickly, she said. Where's the paper? She stayed 4 hours. She wrote 3 letters from his dictation, made lunch from what was in his kitchen, and sat in the other chair with her knitting while he read the stock reports she'd brought in from the hall table, and the fire was good, and outside it began to snow, the slow, deliberate kind that means it intends to stay. And the sitting room was warm and quiet in the way that rooms are warm and quiet when the right number of people are in them. He fell asleep in the chair at some point, she noticed, kept knitting, and did not wake him. He slept the way very tired people sleep, when they finally feel safe enough to, completely, without resistance. When he woke, the light had shifted. He looked at her with the brief, unguarded expression of a man who forgets, for a moment, to be careful. You stayed, he said. The snow, she said. He looked at the window. It was coming down in earnest now, the kind that made the 40-acre walk back to her cabin a serious undertaking. He looked back at her. I'll have Hicks drive you in the wagon, he said. The letters are on the table, she said. Already sealed. I found the stock agent's address on the last envelope. He was quiet for a moment. His gray-blue eyes on her had a quality she hadn't seen in them before, not the careful, deliberate attention he gave most things, but something underneath that, less managed. Nora, he said. It was the first time he had used her given name. She waited. I don't know what to do with you, he said. She looked at her knitting, then at him. You could start by saying thank you for the letters. Something moved in his face. Thank you for the letters, he said, and his voice had a different quality than usual, rougher at the edges, the way voices go when a man is saying more than the words. Hicks drove her home in the wagon. January came in hard and stayed. The social was on the 3rd Saturday, and Robert Ainsley came by on the Wednesday before to confirm she was attending and to remind her that his offer of escort stood. She said she was going with Pearl Dawes, which was true. He smiled with the easy good nature of a man who is not accustomed to obstacles and treats them as temporary, and told her he'd save her a dance. She went to the social. She danced once with Robert Ainsley, who was a good dancer and used the proximity to talk about his plans for expanding the family herd. She danced with Pearl Dawes's husband, who was not a good dancer but was cheerful about it. She stood near the stove and drank cider and talked to the Henderson women about the spring planting, and at some point in the evening she looked across the room at the people gathered and understood clearly that she would have preferred to be sitting in Ed Colton's sitting room with the fire and the stock reports and the snow coming down outside. This information settled in her chest with the weight of something that had been true for a while and was only now being acknowledged. Ed was not at the social. She had not expected him to be. He had not been to a social, Pearl had told her, since Clara died. She left early. She walked home in the January cold with the stars out hard and bright overhead, the kind of clear that follows a storm, and thought about a man sitting alone in a warm house with letters that needed writing. The following Tuesday she went over. He was at the kitchen table with the stock agent's latest reply and an expression of concentrated displeasure. He looked up when she came in. "He wants a deposit by February," he said, without preamble. "Terms changed." "How much?" He told her. She sat down, pulled the letter toward her, read it. "Write back and tell him you'll send half in February and half in April, and if the terms aren't acceptable, he should consider who else in Wyoming County is buying, in the volume you are." She looked up. "Are you the largest buyer in the county?" "Second largest." "Close enough. Say it anyway." He almost smiled. She pushed the paper back toward him. He picked up his pen with the slow deliberateness of a man who has always preferred action to correspondence, and she got up and put the coffee on, and they worked through the reply together, her suggesting, him weighing, the letter getting sharper and more certain with each pass. When it was done, he set down the pen and looked at her across the table. "You're good at that," he said. "I kept accounts for a printer in Laramie. Letters are easier than numbers. Why'd you leave?" She had been waiting for him to ask. He had not asked before, had taken her presence as a given, which she had appreciated, but now she looked at his gray-blue eyes and understood that the question was serious, not casual. "My father died," she said. "And before your father died?" She looked at her coffee. "I was building the kind of life that fits the space you're given when no one expects anything more of you." She paused. It was a small space. He was quiet for a moment. Outside, the January wind moved around the house with a low sound, like something patient. "Clara used to say," he said, "that the difference between a small life and a large one was mostly what a person was willing to ask for." He looked at the table. She was better at asking than I was. It was the longest thing she had heard him say about Clara. She didn't fill the silence after it. After a moment, he stood and carried the cups to the basin. She stood and put on her coat. She was at the door, her hand on the latch, when he said it. Quietly, not as a joke, not with any decoration. 40 years ago, he said, I'd have never let you leave." She stood very still. She heard him exhale. A careful, deliberate sound, like a man who has said something out loud that he meant to keep inside, and is now deciding what to do about it. She turned around. He was standing by the basin, not quite looking at her, his hands braced on the counter edge. The set of his shoulders was the set of a man who has made himself vulnerable and is waiting, without particular hope, to see what happens next. "Ed," she said. "Don't." His voice was careful. "I know what it sounds like. I'm not asking." "What were you like?" she said. 40 years ago." He stopped. "I'm asking," she said. "What were you like?" A long silence. He turned slightly from the counter, not all the way, just enough. "Reckless," he said. "I had too much energy, and not enough sense. I worked from before sunrise. I had opinions about everything." Something shifted in his face. "Clara said I was like a river that didn't know which way it wanted to go." "And now?" she said. He looked at her properly then, the full gray-blue weight of it. "Now I know," he said. "I've known for a long time. I just ran out of places to go." The January kitchen was very quiet. The fire settled. The wind pushed at the window once and moved on. "You said 40 years ago you'd have never let me leave," Nora said. "What would you have done instead?" He was quiet for a long time, long enough that she thought he might not answer. "Then, followed you to the door and asked you to stay." She held his gaze. "Then, ask me." He looked at her for the space of several slow breaths. Then he crossed the kitchen with the same deliberate economy he brought to everything, unhurried, certain, no wasted motion. He stopped in front of her. "Stay," he said. She reached up and straightened the collar of his coat, the worn one, the one that had started all of this, with both hands. A practical gesture, entirely unnecessary. "All right," she said. What would you have done, standing at that door? Would you have turned around, or would you have kept walking? There's no wrong answer, only an honest one. Leave it in the comments. I want to know. He did not ask her to marry him that day. He was not a man who did things before they were ready, and both of them understood that stay was the beginning of something, not the whole of it, and that the whole of it would require time and the specific courage of two people deciding to want things directly, after years of not doing so. What changed was the quality of everything. The Tuesday visits were the same, the Thursday errands were the same, but inside them something had shifted, a slight adjustment of angle, the way you adjust a lamp to get the light where you need it. He told her more. She asked more. The careful management of distance, on both sides, was quietly and without announcement put down. Pearl Dawes noticed within the week. She said nothing directly to Nora, but she stopped adding the cautionary observations she'd been offering since October, which was its own kind of commentary. Robert Ainsley came by once more in late January. She told him clearly and without excessive explanation that she was not available, which was as honest a summary of the situation as she could produce. He took it with good grace and rode back to his family's North Acres, and that was the end of it. On the 1st of February, Ed came to her door on a Saturday evening, not a Tuesday, not a Thursday, with his hat in both hands and the expression of a man who has thought something through completely and is committed to the last step. She opened the door and looked at him. "The sitting room in the main house," he said. "The east one. Clara kept her things there. I've been going through it." He paused. "I'd like you to see it, when you're ready. I want it to be yours, if you'll have it." She understood what he was saying, not just the room. The room was not the point. The room was the way he knew how to say the point. "I'll come Sunday," she said. "All right?" He turned his hat in his hands. "I'd also like—" He stopped, started again. "I have a ring. It was my mother's. I've been carrying it in my coat pocket since January." He looked at her with the gray-blue eyes that had started as careful and had, over 5 months, become something else entirely. "I think that's long enough to carry it without asking." She stepped back from the door. "Come in," she said. "It's cold." He came in. The Wyoming February wrapped the cabin in its serious cold outside, and the fire was good inside, and the lamp was lit, and Nora Bright stood in her father's kitchen and held out her hand, and Edward Colton, 63 years old, lean and weathered and careful, a man who had forgotten and was remembering, took it. He put his mother's ring on her finger in the lamplight, plain gold, worn smooth from decades of a woman's hand. She looked at it for a moment without speaking. "It fits," she said. "I thought it might," he said. "I've been looking at your hand since October." She looked up at him. He said it without any particular self-consciousness, the way he said everything that mattered, plainly, without decoration, trusting her to receive it. 40 years ago," she said quietly, "you'd have never let me leave." "No," he said. "And now?" "Now I'm asking you to stay permanently." The corner of his mouth moved, the almost smile, the one that cost him something each time. "Which I'd argue is better." She thought it was considerably better. They were married in March, when the first edge came off the Wyoming winter, and the creek between their properties ran free again under the last of its ice. The Millbrook Church, full to the walls. Pearl Dawes in the second pew with the expression of a woman whose instincts have been vindicated. Hicks the foreman in his good jacket, looking stoically emotional. Robert Ainsley was not present, being engaged by then to the Ainsley family's neighboring daughter, which struck everyone as a sensible arrangement. Ed stood at the altar and watched Nora come toward him in a dress the color of new spring grass. Not white, she had told him, because it showed everything you tracked in from the yard, which was a practical concern he had not been able to argue with, and understood with the full accumulated weight of 63 years how close he had come to letting a scarf be just a scarf, and a fence post be just a fence post, and a Tuesday be just a Tuesday. Nora moved into the main house that same week. She took the east sitting room, which Ed had cleared with the same careful thoroughness he brought to all things, and which she refurnished gradually, over weeks, with her own books, and her knitting basket, and the lamp from her father's cabin that she was partial to, not erasing anything, just adding to it the way a room adds to itself over time when people live honestly inside it. She kept the knitting up in the evenings. Ed sat on his side of the fire with whatever required reading he had, and she worked her needles, and sometimes they talked and sometimes they didn't, and the difference between the two had stopped mattering some time ago. One evening in April, she finished a pair of gloves and held them up in the firelight. Dark gray, good thick wool. His hands had measured them without knowing it, every time she'd watched him work. She leaned over and put them in his lap. He looked at them, then at her. "You've been making those since January," he said. "December, actually." He turned one over in his hands with the same attention he'd given the scarf that first Thursday, slid it on. The fit was exact. "You measured without asking," he said. "I've been paying attention since October," she said, "which I'd argue is fair." He looked at the glove on his hand, then at her. The fire moved between them, casting its warm, irregular light. Outside, the April wind came through the valley, with the first actual warmth of the year in it. Thin, tentative, the warmth that doesn't commit yet, but promises. 40 years ago, he said quietly, I'd have been too reckless to deserve this. She picked up her knitting. Then it's good we waited, she said. He put on the other glove, turned back to his reading. The fire kept on. The April night settled around the house, with the particular gentleness of a season changing toward something better. And Nora Bright, who had come to Millbrook to settle an estate and failed to leave, which turned out to be the finest decision she had never quite made, knitted one more row and did not say anything else, because some things are complete without a word, and this was one of them. If this story gave you something to carry tonight, a like on this video is the simplest way to tell me it reached you. And if you're new here, there are more frontier romances waiting. Subscribe so you don't miss a single one. Wherever you are in this world, thank you for riding along. Until next time, keep riding.